Some men wake to freedom. Others wake to a world that steals it before sunrise. Cryo? The sky above the James River held a soft, reluctant gray, the kind of quiet that pretended peace before the labor bell tolled. Thornfield Plantation, Virginia, stirred from its slumber. But Samuel had been awake long before the roosters crowed. He moved through the morning mist barefoot, a wooden bucket in each hand, steps practiced, steady, silent. His muscles remembered the path by heart, past the smokehouse, past the well-worn porch where the master's boots thudded on Saturday inspections, past the field where his father once stood tall before a book in his hand cost him everything. Samuel did not read, not anymore. He was the plantation's carpenter, its fixer, builder, maker of everything but his own destiny. For over 4 decades, Samuel Howell had shaped wood with a reverence few could understand. He had carved cradles and coffins, repaired fences and dreams. Each board he smoothed, every joint he fitted, had held the whisper of something more. But today would not whisper, it would scream. Back in the slave quarters, smoke curled from stone chimneys, the scent of cornmeal and ash, clinging to the cool. Celia, his wife, stirred the pot over fire, her face lined with both love and the weight of years. Their children, Moses, Ruth, and Jacob, huddled near her, sleepy-eyed and unaware of what the day might bring. Samuel's hands were already blistered by sunup, not from work, but from holding back what he wanted to say. There were rumors again, overseers whispering by the stable, horsemen arriving from Richmond, and the kind of silence that always came before chains. He set the buckets down by the steps, listened. Wind in the trees, a dog's bark, distant laughter from the big house. Echo, and then a creak of the upstairs shutters, a flicker of white curtain. The master was awake. Samuel didn't look up, didn't need to. He knew the movements of William Harroway, like he knew the grain of cypress wood. Harroway didn't beat with rage, he punished with ritual, cold, calculated, always in control. And that was worse. At the woodshop, Samuel passed young Ben, barely 10, dragging lumber like a man twice his size. "Keep your back straight," Samuel muttered. Ben obeyed, grateful just to be seen. Inside, the scent of pine and smoke calmed Samuel's nerves. Here, among the chisels and clamps, he could pretend for a moment that the world was measured and fair, that if you cut the angles right, nothing would fall apart. But Thornfield wasn't made of wood. It was built on secrets, on sails, on children taken in the night. Samuel had lived through it all. He had survived the lash, survived hunger, survived the sale of his father, the death of his mother, the countless mornings where hope was too expensive to afford. But this morning, this one felt different. He returned home just as Celia pulled cornbread from the fire. Their daughter Ruth was braiding her mother's hair. Jacob was humming a song no one taught him. And Moses, tall now, nearly a man, was sketching lines in the dirt with a stick, drawing something he didn't want his father to see. "Moses," Samuel said gently. The boy looked up. "Don't let your mind go where your body can't follow." Moses nodded, but Samuel saw the fire in his son's eyes, the kind that couldn't be dulled, the kind that asked questions, the kind that got men sold. A horn sounded in the distance. Horses. More than 2. Samuel didn't react. He stood, slowly, wiped his hands on his shirt, and walked back toward the woodshop. Inside, he leaned on the oak table, heart pounding in time with the hammer. He refused to lift. He didn't know yet what the day would bring. But deep in his bones, he felt it. Something had already been taken. What happens when a father realizes silence can no longer protect his family? What price would he pay to keep the ones he loves from vanishing into the world beyond the fields? If this story already has you leaning in, don't look away. Subscribe to uncover the chapters of courage history tried to bury. The next section holds the moment where love meets the threat of loss, and a man begins to choose fire over silence. In a world where survival is silent, even whispers can bring ruin. It began with hushed voices over boiling pots and stolen glances between cabins. Aunt Bess, who'd lived through 3 generations of pain, said she felt it in her bones. Jenny from the smokehouse heard Fletcher, the overseer, talking low to a stranger by the stables. And always, when white men whispered, black families held their children tighter. Night inside the cabin, Samuel sat sharpening his draw-knife, though it didn't need it, his ears tuned to everything outside. Footsteps, murmurs, the distant sound of a whip crack, far off but familiar enough to tighten his jaw. Oh, Celia leaned close. They talking you about our boy. Samuel didn't move, didn't blink. Just kept running the blade against stone, steady, steady. Moses? He asked. She nodded. The boy's too clever, she whispered. Too tall, too proud. Samuel exhaled slowly. That wasn't a compliment. Not here. Moses was 14, but already his eyes saw more than they should. He asked questions, read things he wasn't supposed to, drew strange diagrams in the dirt, and he had that walk, shoulders back like he'd already tasted a world that didn't chain his name. Fletcher said they got buyers coming next week, Celia said. You know what that means. He knew. He knew. Every season brought the risk of separation. Children disappeared like dew in sunlight, traded for tobacco profits, debts, and favors. Families torn apart on wooden blocks and ink-stained ledgers. And now it was Moses. Samuel didn't respond. He placed the blade down gently, looked over to the corner where Moses was bent over a plank, sketching something with charcoal. He was building a cart in his mind, or maybe a bridge, maybe a way out. You ask him about it? Samuel said. Celia shook her head. He don't know. He trusts too easy. Samuel stood, every joint aching from years the world refused to carry. He walked over to Moses and watched his son draw, clean lines, bold strokes, no hesitation. You making something? He asked. Moses nodded. A wheel, Papa, but one that don't break. Samuel stared at him for a long moment. Good, he said quietly. Then maybe it'll carry you somewhere better. The boy looked up, confused. You? Samuel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That night, Celia cried beside the fire while the children slept. Samuel didn't hold her. His hands were busy carving, a piece of walnut, a man, woman, and 3 children. No faces yet, just shapes he didn't want to forget. Oh, the next day news spread. 4 traders from Georgia had arrived. They were staying 2 nights. Just enough time to look over the stock. Samuel noticed Fletcher watching Moses as he lifted barrels near the smokehouse. The overseer scribbled something on a scrap of paper. Later, at the woodshop, young Ben whispered, They take in names, Mr. Wilson. Samuel's grip tightened on the handle of his hammer. By sunset, Haraway himself came down to the slave quarters. He strolled like a man admiring horses before an auction. Celia pulled the children inside. Samuel stood at the door, silent. Evening, Samuel, Haraway said, smiling like it meant something. You've raised a fine young man. Samuel said nothing. Haraway nodded at the cabin. Strong arms, sharp mind. That boy'll fetch a fine price. Still, Samuel stayed quiet. The master gave a little shrug. Debt's a cruel thing. Can't have luxuries when the bank's breathing down your neck. He turned, boots crunching gravel, and left without waiting for a response. Kill. Celia broke down the moment he disappeared behind the oaks. Samuel sat with her until the fire burned low. Yo, do something, she said. He didn't answer. He was already planning. What happens when a man has nothing left to lose but his name, and the last thing holding it together is marked for sale? If this story is gripping your chest like a vise, you're not alone. Don't miss what comes next. When silence cracks and fire begins to flicker, hit subscribe, because Samuel's next move could change everything. Not all storms come with thunder. Some arrive as whispers at your door. Co. The moon that night hung low and heavy, as if it too carried the weight of secrets. Samuel didn't sleep. Instead, he sat by the dying fire, eyes locked on the shadows outside the window. Somewhere out there, decisions were being made about his son, about his family, and about what he would or would not do. Just past midnight, a soft knock came at the door. 3 quick taps, 1 pause, then 2 more. Samuel opened it. It was Elias, the stable hand, thin, fast, and always listening when others weren't. "They picked him," Elias whispered. "Your boy, Moses. They got his name on the trader list. Tomorrow they come in for him." Samuel stared at him. No shock, just quiet acceptance, like a man finally hearing what he already feared. "I heard Haraway talking to that Georgia man," Elias continued. "Sign, the boy's clean, strong. You know trouble in him yet." "Said he'd fetch more if he went without fight." Samuel's jaw clenched. "Where they taken him?" "Oh, Savannah," Elias said, "then likely down south. To Cotton, a deeper hell." Behind him, Celia stirred in her sleep, unaware that their lives had tilted. "Thank you," Samuel said. "You told no one else?" "You?" Elias shook his head. "No, sir, but you gotta move fast, I know." As Elias slipped into the darkness, Samuel shut the door and bolted it quietly. He turned back toward the fire. The wooden carving lay on the table, unfinished. He picked it up, rubbed the back of the boy figure with his thumb. A storm was coming, one without wind or rain. No, he would meet it with wood, iron, and fire. Morning came too quickly. The plantation seemed unnaturally still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Samuel walked to the woodshop with Moses, just as he always did. Routine was their shield, but this time his son felt the tension. He saw it in the lines on his father's face, the set of his jaw, the silence between his words. "You okay, Papa?" "Yeah." Samuel nodded. "We got work today." "Big work?" Moses smiled. He liked the days when they built things together. But they wouldn't be building just a cart today. No, inside the shop, Samuel closed the door and dropped the wooden beam across it. He handed Moses a mallet. "Start pounding that nail slowly like it's a normal day." Moses blinked. "Why?" Because someone's always listening." Outside, Fletcher passed by with 2 strangers glancing toward the woodshop. They didn't stop. Samuel watched through the knothole in the door until their footsteps faded. Then he turned to Moses. "There's something I gotta tell you, but you need to listen hard, and you can't panic." Moses nodded, eyes wide. "They mean to take you today. Trade you south." The boy froze. "I'm not letting that happen," Samuel continued, "but we only get 1 shot, 1 move. And you need to trust me." Moses' breath came fast now, panic rising. "I'm not leaving you," he said. "Oh, you won't have to," Samuel replied. "Not if we do this right." "No?" And then Samuel reached beneath the floorboards and pulled out a roll of oiled cloth. Inside, a carefully hidden map, a compass, a small sack of dried meat, and a key. Freedom didn't wait. It had to be built. And what would you risk if you knew your child had only hours left before being taken forever? What would you build if nails and wood were all you had to fight back? This is where the heartbeat starts racing. If you're feeling it, subscribe. Because Samuel's hammer hasn't dropped yet. And when it does, history itself will tremble. Some storms tear down trees, others tear through lives. The sun rose heavy that day, its heat thick and pressing like a weight on every shoulder. Thornfield Plantation glowed golden, but beneath the surface, something simmered. Samuel moved like any other morning, deliberate, quiet, but not slow. Every glance, every breath was measured. He greeted Fletcher with a nod, carried planks to the cart, hammered joints. From the outside, nothing was unusual. Except everything was. At midday, the traders returned, 3 men on horseback, papers in hand, eyes scanning the yard. Samuel saw them from the corner of his eye and felt his grip on the hammer tighten. Moses was in the barn, collecting tools. Safe for now, Fletcher met the traders by the smokehouse. Haraway followed, a ledger tucked beneath his arm, businesslike, efficient. The boy would be called soon. Samuel stepped into the barn. "Moses," he said, "time." The boy's eyes widened. "Now." "No, now." Samuel handed him the cloth bundle. "You remember the path, to the creek? Then west until the fence splits. Follow the moss. Good. Don't stop. Don't look back." Moses hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll hold the storm." A beat. Then Moses turned, ran to the back door, and vanished into the trees. Outside, Haraway's voice called out, "Samuel!" "Oh?" He stepped into the light. "Yes, sir?" "Oh?" "Bring the boy." Samuel shook his head slowly. "He's not here." Fletcher took a step forward. "What do you mean, not here?" "He's gone." The silence that followed was thick and immediate, the kind that cracked seconds before it exploded. "You lying to me?" Haraway asked. Samuel didn't answer. Fletcher lunged forward, grabbing Samuel by the shirt. "Where is he?" "He?" Samuel didn't flinch. "Gone." And then the storm broke. The overseer struck first, a fist to the jaw. Samuel stumbled, but didn't fall. Another blow, blood on his lip now. "You think you can play hero?" Fletcher spat. Samuel stood tall. Not a hero, just a father. The traders moved in. One raised a whip, another drew a pistol. And that's when Samuel grabbed his hammer. It wasn't planned, it wasn't strategy, it was instinct, rage, love. Decades of silence unleashed in a single swing. The hammer struck Fletcher in the shoulder. Bone cracked. He fell back, screaming. Chaos erupted. One trader fired. Missed. Samuel swung again. The second man collapsed. Screams. Running feet. Dogs barking. Samuel didn't wait. He turned and ran toward the tree line, heart pounding in time with his footsteps. Not away, but to lead them away. From Moses, bullets tore through branches. Bark exploded near his head. But Samuel didn't stop. Behind him, the plantation boiled with confusion. Haraway shouted. Riders scrambled. But their prize, the boy, was already gone. Samuel leapt the fence, vanished into the woods. The storm had come. But it didn't break him. How far will a man run? Not to escape, but to shield his son from a fate he knows too well. And what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? No, this is the moment where stories are born and legends take root. Subscribe now, because the chase has begun and freedom is no longer a dream. It's a trail of footsteps in the woods. He wasn't running from something. He was running for someone. The forest swallowed Samuel whole. Towering pines closed around him like sentinels, their needles soft underfoot, muffling his steps. Shafts of light cut through the canopy, painting the ground in streaks of gold. But there was no time to marvel at nature. Behind him, the chase had begun. He could hear it. Hooves pounding, dogs barking, men shouting. They were angry, not just because he had struck back, but because he had embarrassed them. He had made a mockery of their control. Samuel ran not with speed, but with precision. He followed the creek for a mile, then veered west, just like he taught Moses. Always west, toward moss-covered stones, toward shadows, toward hope. Blood from his lip trickled down his chin. But he didn't wipe it. Pain was useful. It meant he was still moving. He reached the first marker, a twisted tree that leaned like a bent elbow. He paused only long enough to listen. Nothing but birdsong. The riders had taken the wider path. Good! He pressed on, deeper into the green silence. By sunset, the forest changed. The trees grew denser, the air colder. Crickets chirped like tiny alarms. Samuel found a hollow beneath a fallen log and crawled in. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. Now his thoughts turned to Moses. Was the boy safe? Had he found the creek, the split fence, the trail north? Samuel had packed enough dried meat to last Moses 4 days. Past that, he'd need to trust kind strangers, if any existed. Samuel had met both kinds in his travels. Some who whispered warnings, some who betrayed for coin. He prayed his son would meet the first kind. Morning came gray and damp. Samuel moved again, slower now, conserving energy. He crossed a shallow stream, careful not to leave prints in the mud. Every choice mattered. Every misstep could be the last. He followed a ridge that overlooked the plantation valley. Smoke curled in the distance. Search parties still combed the area. He'd made it far, but not far enough. That night, as owls called from the trees, he allowed himself a single moment of stillness. He pulled the carving from his pouch, the one of the man, woman, and children. It had cracked during the fight. He didn't mind. Scars had meaning. He carved a new line into the base with a small nail. Another tally, another day survived. The next morning brought rain. It was a blessing. It erased his tracks and masked his scent. The dogs would struggle, but rain also made travel harder. Slippery rocks, soaked clothes, cold bones. He pressed on. Near noon, he heard voices, men close. Samuel dropped low, crawling into a thicket. Found prints down by the gully, one said, can't be far. Haraway's offering 30 for him alive. Samuel waited, heart pounding, then silence. Minutes passed, maybe more. He emerged slowly and doubled back, circling wide. His stomach growled. No time to stop. By dusk, he reached the border of the old Cherokee Trail, a route known to a few, marked only by stacked stones and ancient carvings. Moses had been taught to find it. If he had, he'd be well ahead. Samuel dropped to his knees beside the trail's edge and whispered a name he hadn't spoken in years. Thomas. Thomas had helped once before, a carpenter from the north who passed through disguised as a surveyor. He left behind tools, maps, and one promise. No, if you ever find the path, follow the crow marks. You'll reach help. Samuel looked up. On a nearby tree, barely visible, was a crude crow etched into the bark. He smiled. How long can one man outpace a hunt born of vengeance? And will he find help before his strength fades? He's close, but the woods are watching, and the wrong move could mean never seeing his son again. Subscribe now. Because Samuel's next step could be into safety, or straight into a trap. Some roads are paved in stone, others are carved in whispers. By dawn, Samuel stood at the edge of a ravine, its sides overgrown and crumbling. A shallow stream ran below, muddy, slow-moving, forgotten. Few dared to cross it. Fewer still knew what lay beyond. But Samuel did. This was the path Thomas had spoken of, not a trail in the usual sense, but a network, hidden by trees, by night, by the courage of those who dared to build it in silence. A path for the hunted, a lifeline for the brave, the underground path. He slid down the ravine wall, careful not to disturb too much soil, and crossed the stream. On the other side, he searched the base of an old oak. There it was, 3 stones stacked neatly, the top one marked with a single scratch. A sign, Samuel smiled. Someone had come this way. Moses, he followed the markings, bundles of twigs, knots in vines, chalk lines on rocks. He was being guided by people he could not see, people who risked their own safety for strangers like him. For hours Samuel walked. At one point he passed a thicket and caught the scent of firewood. Smoke curled faintly into the sky. He crept closer. A cabin, half buried in earth, camouflaged by brush. Inside, a woman stirred a pot over a fire. A man cleaned boots by the door. Neither looked surprised when Samuel stepped into the clearing. "Thornfield?" the man asked. Samuel nodded. The woman pointed to a bench. "Sit, eat. You've come far." They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They'd seen the bruises, the blood, the look in Samuel's eyes. They offered bread, a clean shirt, and a few hours' rest. Later, the man unrolled a map. "You're 2 days from the crossing corms. You're 2 days from the crossing," he said. "Your boy's ahead of you. He passed through here yesterday morning." Samuel exhaled. Relief and fear collided. "He made good time," the man added. "Fast, quiet, smart. That's his mother in him," Samuel said. They all smiled. The woman handed Samuel a satchel. Inside were dried fruits, water, and a small wooden pendant, a hammer carved into its face. "For strength," she said. Samuel took it, his throat thick with emotion. "Go now," she whispered, "before the rain comes." That night, Samuel slept beneath the boughs of a pine tree, clutching the pendant like a compass. He dreamed of home, not the plantation, but the home he had yet to build. A place without chains, without overseers, a place where Moses could grow into a man without fear. He woke to the sound of thunder. Rain fell in sheets, drenching the forest, turning trails to mud. But Samuel welcomed it. It washed away scent. Tracks, trails, it bought him time. By late afternoon, he reached the ridge overlooking the second marker, a red barn with a crooked roof barely visible through the trees. This was the rendezvous point, and there, on the edge of the clearing, was a figure, small, thin, Moses. He was alive, Samuel didn't call out. Instead, he whistled low, 3 short notes. Their signal. Moses turned, eyes wide, then ran toward him. They embraced beneath the pines, soaked to the bone, hearts pounding. "You made it," Moses said. "So did you, for the first time in days?" Samuel allowed himself to cry. They've reunited, but they're not free yet. What lies beyond the next bend in the path could bring salvation or betrayal. This is the moment we hold our breath. Stick with us, because what comes next will test every bond, every step, and every ounce of courage they have left. Freedom isn't a destination. It's the distance between being chased and being chosen. Samuel and Moses held each other beneath the cold curtain of rain, hearts racing as one. It wasn't just the storm that soaked them. It was fear, exhaustion, and now finally something fragile and flickering, relief. But it wouldn't last. The red barn ahead was a landmark, not a sanctuary. They still had miles to go. "Did anyone follow you?" Samuel asked. "No," Moses said, "but there were riders, dogs. I heard 'em behind me last night." Samuel nodded. "We stay low. We don't light fires. We move only by moonlight." And they did. That night, they curled up in the loft of an abandoned shack. Wind creaked the walls, mice scurried in the dark. But to them, it was shelter. They whispered stories of Sarah's garden, of David learning to read, of the time Samuel had carved a rocking chair without measurements, and it came out crooked as a question mark. Beating. They laughed softly, just enough to remember they were alive. The next day brought clear skies and clearer danger. By noon, they crossed a ridge where the trees thinned. A wrong step here could expose them. They crouched low, moving like shadows. In the distance, a group of riders moved along the lower road. Haraway's men, no doubt. Their horses kicked up dust, and one man carried a rifle across his saddle. Samuel pulled Moses down behind a fallen log. "Quiet," he mouthed. The riders passed, slow searching. When the dust settled, they waited a full hour before moving again. No, that night, they reached the final checkpoint before the crossing, a stone well at the edge of a hill. If the cover was in place, an old iron lid etched with a star, it meant the path was clear. They approached it cautiously. The lid was missing. Samuel froze. "No signal," he whispered. Moses looked up at him. "Does that mean?" Samuel nodded. "Could be danger ahead." They had two choices: wait and risk being found, or go forward blind. "We wait," Samuel said. "One night, then we move." That night, neither of them slept. They took turns watching the trees, listening for hooves, sniffing the air for smoke. Morning broke, golden and cold. Still no signal, still no sign. Samuel knelt by the well, scratched a symbol into the stone, a crescent moon. A message: if anyone was watching, we pass through, uncertain. Then he turned to Moses. "We go. Stay close." The forest gave way to rolling fields. In the distance, a creek shimmered in the sun. Beyond that, the low line of hills marking the edge of what the maps called the Free Provinces. Freedom wasn't a guarantee, but it was a chance. They crossed the creek slowly, boots heavy with mud. Every splash echoed in Samuel's mind like a warning bell. And then, a sound. Click. A single step forward triggered the sound of metal, a rifle bolt. Samuel pushed Moses behind him. From behind a tree, a figure emerged. A boy, barely older than Moses, holding a hunting rifle. His clothes were ragged, but his eyes sharp. "Who are you?" the boy asked. "No harm," Samuel said. Just passing through, the boy looked them over, saw the bruises, the fear, the hammer pendant. "You from Thornfield?" Samuel's heart skipped. "Yes." The boy lowered the rifle. "My uncle helped some folks like you last year. Said if I ever saw that symbol, I was to take him north." Samuel exhaled. "Come on," the boy said. "You're almost there. They've made it through the woods. But what lies at the end of this path? True safety, or just a different kind of storm? The finish line is near, but freedom has one last test. Stick with us, because some journeys don't end with a gate. They begin with one. They say the last step is always the hardest, not because of distance, but because of doubt. The boy led them through the underbrush, past twisted oaks and through thickets that snagged their clothes. He moved fast, light on his feet, familiar with every deer trail and mossy shortcut. Moses kept pace. Samuel, though older and sore, forced each step. He could almost see the finish line. But in his mind, finish lines often disappeared just before he reached them. The boy's name was Elijah, barely 15, wiry, quick with a joke, but serious when needed. He had seen things no boy should see, and yet his spirit hadn't broken. "My uncle says people like you built this land," Elijah said over his shoulder. "But they don't teach that in schools." Samuel gave a quiet chuckle. "They rarely teach the truth." As night fell, they reached the edge of a long, narrow valley. At the far end stood a small house with smoke drifting lazily from the chimney. Behind it, a grove of trees swayed in the wind, marking the border. "That's the gate," Elijah whispered. "Where's the crossing?" Samuel asked. "Behind the house, through the grove. There's a path marked with feathers. That's the trail to the safe side." Samuel scanned the field. Too open, too exposed. "You said someone's home?" Elijah nodded. "An old couple. They've helped before. But lately, what?" "Illy. They've been watched." And Samuel looked at Moses, who stared silently across the field. We wait till dark, Samuel said. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting a silver sheen over the grass. Then a flicker in the window of the house. 3 flashes of light. Elijah gasped. That's the signal. It was time. They moved low through the field. Every rustle felt like thunder. Samuel held Moses' hand tightly. Elijah led the way. They reached the back of the house. The door creaked open. An elderly woman stepped out, holding a lantern. Inside, quick, she whispered. They entered a warm kitchen. Smells of stew filled the air. But there was no time for comfort. 2 riders passed by at dusk, she said, asked questions. Didn't like my answers, her husband entered, wiping his hands on a rag. Feathers are set. But hurry. Don't follow the path too long. Cut east after the 3rd oak. Samuel nodded. Thank you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wooden carving. A man, woman and 2 children, and placed it on the table. For your kindness. The woman touched it gently. Go before the dogs catch your trail. The forest behind the house was thick, dark, but the feathers glowed faintly with crushed mica, reflecting the moonlight. They followed them silently. First feather. Second, a sound behind them, branches snapping. They froze. A low growl. Dogs, Moses whispered. Go 3rd oak, Samuel said. Now! They veered east, crashing through underbrush, stumbling but never stopping. The dogs barked louder, closer. Then lights ahead. Torches? No, lanterns. Figures emerged, not riders, not overseers, people. Men and women with coats, ropes, tools. One held a rifle, not aimed to shoot, but to protect. You from Thornfield? A tall man asked. Yo, Samuel could barely breathe. Yes, the man smiled. Then welcome. He turned and waved. We got him! A quiet cheer rose from the group. Moses collapsed into the arms of a woman who looked like his mother, but wasn't. Just someone who had chosen to care. Samuel dropped to his knees, exhausted. He was free. The gate is behind them. But what kind of life lies ahead? Can a man forged in survival ever learn to rest? They made it, but their story is far from over. Stick with us, because crossing the border doesn't erase the past. It only opens the door to what comes next. Some men build houses, others build new lives. The first morning in the north smelled of ash and maple, a far cry from the thick, damp heat of Thornfield. Samuel awoke on a straw mattress, in a safe house outside St. Catherine's, Ontario, legs stiff, hands blistered but chest light. Light with something unfamiliar, hope. Moses still slept beside him, curled tight, like a boy half his age. They had survived the storm, the chase, and the silence. Now came the noise of beginning again. They spent their first days under watchful care. Locals, black families who had made the journey before them, offered bread, firewood, and quiet company. No questions, no judgment, just a nod that said, we've been there. A man named Joseph took them in, a carpenter with a thick beard and arms like beams. He spoke in short sentences and worked with long patience. I ever held a chisel? He asked Samuel. I've held a hammer, Samuel replied. Joseph grinned. Good. That's where it starts. By the 3rd week, Samuel was shaping wood with purpose, not for an overseer, not under whip or watchtower, but with rhythm his own. He carved chairs, shelves, frames. He taught Moses how to sand, how to measure, how to treat every nail like a signature. Your hands are your story, Samuel told him. Write it proud. Moses listened and learned. But freedom wasn't free of ghosts. Some nights, Samuel would sit alone by the hearth, staring into the fire. He'd run his fingers over the wooden carving Sarah had tucked into his bag, a man, woman, and 2 children. He'd think of her, of David, of the life they left behind. Oh, he never stopped wondering if they made it, but he didn't let grief win. He turned it into grit. He built benches for schools, beds for shelters, and crates for traders. His work spread across town. People began to ask, who made this? Answer, Samuel Wilson. The quiet man with steady hands and eyes like storm clouds. One spring morning, Moses came running into the shop, waving a letter. "It's from Niagara," he said. "The church there needs help building their roof." Samuel took the paper, read the request, and nodded. "Let's go." Their journey to Niagara took 2 days. Along the way, they passed fields, rivers, and tiny towns stitched together by shared hardship and mutual respect. At the church, they found more than rafters and nails. They found purpose. Samuel worked with men who had escaped Georgia, Virginia, and Carolina. Each swing of the hammer echoed with defiance. Each beam raised was a declaration. We are here. We matter. We build. They sang as they worked. Not hymns of sorrow, but songs of arrival. Songs that stitched old pain into new pride. Moses grew strong. He learned to read, to write, and to lead. By Shurchi, he was teaching younger boys how to plane wood and draw blueprints. Samuel watched him with quiet pride. This, he thought, is the future I ran toward. Samuel is free, building a new life. But will the past ever truly let go? Can a man with 2 names ever become whole? They escaped the storm, but peace is its own kind of test. Stay with us. As Samuel's journey from builder of barns to builder of legacies reaches its most powerful chapter, the past doesn't knock. It whispers through cracks in the present. Years passed. The tools in Samuel's hands became extensions of his will, measured, sharp, dependable. His small workshop in the heart of St. Catherine's was never empty. Locals came to learn, to commission, or simply to hear the quiet man with stories in his silence. He never raised his voice, but every nail he drove spoke louder than sermons. One day, while organizing old blueprints, Moses found a tattered piece of cloth tucked between pages. Brown, worn, and stitched with the initials S.W. "Yours?" he asked. Samuel nodded slowly. "From a shirt your mother made." Moses paused. "Do you think she's still—" "I don't know," Samuel said. "But I still pray she is." That evening, a stranger knocked on their door, a wiry man in his 40s wearing a dusty coat and boots worn from travel. "You, Samuel Wilson?" Samuel stepped forward. "Who's asking?" "Name's Abel. I just came from Detroit. Your name's spoken there. People say you help folks find purpose." Samuel studied him. His hands told the truth. Scarred palms, crooked fingers. "You ever used a lathe?" "Once or twice." Samuel nodded. "Come back tomorrow. We'll see if your hands remember." Abel returned the next day, then the next and the next. Soon, others followed. Men and women from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and even backwoods Kentucky. Some had papers. Some didn't. Most had stories they couldn't tell, but eyes that spoke volumes. Samuel didn't ask. He handed them hammers. You want peace," he'd say, "build it." The workshop drew into a brotherhood, an unofficial school of the forgotten. They built benches, furniture, tools, and slowly they rebuilt themselves. One afternoon, Moses burst into the shop with a letter in hand. He looked stunned. "No." Samuel took it, opened the envelope with steady fingers. In faint, careful handwriting, she described a boy she once knew. A boy taken from her arms when he was 14. She described a scar under his chin, a mole behind his ear, and how he never cried when he fell. Oh, the letter ended with one line. "Oh no, if this is you, I am your mother." Samuel sat in silence. He read the letter again and again. Then he smiled. Weeks later, they traveled south to Buffalo, then Erie, then a quiet town nestled among green hills. There, in a small wooden home, an old woman waited by the porch. She stood as they approached, wobbly, frail. But when her eyes met Samuel's, she stood straighter than any soldier. "Samuel?" He didn't speak. He just stepped forward, took her hands, and held them like a lifeline. Moses watched from a distance, watched a man become a son again, watched a silence end. They stayed 2 nights, laughed, cooked, talked through tears. Samuel asked about his sisters, about his father, about the tree he used to climb before dusk. Cecily Ford. Some stories had happy endings, others didn't, but Ruth, now free, had lived to see her son rise. Reunited after decades apart. But what happens when the man who ran from the past must now carry it forward? History hides in old hands and quiet homes. Don't miss the next chapter, because some goodbyes take a lifetime to turn into hellos. Some names are whispered, others are carved into time. Back in St. Catherine's, the workshop had become more than a place of work. It was now a school, a gathering spot, a place of healing. Samuel never advertised, never claimed fame, but word of him spread like wind through wheat fields. People came with nothing but worn shoes and splinters of hope. They left with tools, skills, and purpose. One winter morning, a group of children gathered outside the shop. Moses had begun teaching weekend classes, and today's lesson was about wood joints. "Why does it matter how the pieces fit?" one boy asked. Moses smiled. "Because weak joints break when pressure comes. Strong ones bend and hold." In the back, Samuel listened quietly. That night, he added another carving to his shelf. A pair of hands, one large, one small, fitting a chisel into a groove. In the spring of each end bad by Chisur, Samuel was invited to speak at a community gathering. It wasn't his style. He preferred to let others talk. But Moses convinced him. "You don't have to tell them everything," he said. "Just enough, so they know who built this place." Samuel stood before a modest crowd in a church basement. Light streamed through the windows. Children sat cross-legged at the front. Elders in the back nodded slowly, recognizing his face. "I was born into silence," Samuel began. "A silence forced by chains and fear and the weight of being told your name doesn't matter." He paused. "But I've learned that your name is not given to you. It's carved by what you build, who you raise, and what you stand for." The room fell into a hush. And my name, Samuel Wilson, was shaped by wooden will. I may not be in books, but the benches you sit on, the homes you live in, the doors that open freely, that's where my name lives. After the talk, an elder approached him. "You ever think of writing this down?" she asked. Samuel shook his head. "I leave that to others," she smiled. "Then others will make sure it's remembered." Years passed. Samuel continued working well into his 70s. His hands shook more, his steps slowed, but his spirit sharpened with age. He taught until he could no longer lift the hammer. And then he taught with words. Stories of how to read wood, how to listen to grain, how to fix a crooked beam without breaking it. He told children, wood forgives, it bends before it breaks. We should do the same, they remembered. Oh, one autumn morning, a visitor came from the city, a young reporter, notebook in hand. I've heard about your work," she said. "I'd like to write about it." Samuel chuckled. "I'm just a carpenter." You know, the woman smiled. "Maybe, but you've been building more than furniture, haven't you? You know, as the world changes, how does a man ensure his story doesn't vanish in the noise?" Samuel's name lives not in headlines, but in heritage. Stay with us as we uncover the final chapter of a man who carved more than wood. He carved legacy. Even the strongest builders must one day set down the hammer, but not the legacy. Winter came early that year. Frost kissed the windows by mid-October, and the streets of St. Catherine's filled with the crunch of boots on brittle snow. Samuel no longer rose before dawn. His hands, once firm as oak, now trembled when wrapping cloth around firewood. But his eyes, still storm-gray, carried the same quiet force. He spent his mornings by the fire, often carving small tokens, birds, trees, tiny houses, gifts for students, neighbors, friends, simples of what could be built with patient hands and a steady heart. Moses ran the workshop now. Under his care, it thrived. He trained dozens of young craftsmen, passed down his father's techniques, and introduced new ones of his own. Every week, Moses would sit beside Samuel and read letters aloud. Notes from Dolot, former students who had started their own businesses in Halifax, Detroit, Montreal. "Oh, dear Mr. Wilson," one began, "the bed I made for my daughter was stronger than anything I ever thought I could build. You gave me more than tools. You gave me belief." Samuel would nod silently, a faint smile tracing his lips. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Samuel sat with Moses in the quiet glow of lamplight. "Do you ever think about the beginning?" Moses asked. Samuel exhaled slowly. "Sometimes, but the past doesn't hold me like it used to. I've built too much to be trapped in old shadows." He paused, then added, "Freedom wasn't just a place, Moses. It was becoming someone I chose to be." The next morning, Samuel didn't rise. Moses found him still and peaceful, the wooden carving of the family in his hand. His eyes were closed, his face calm. He had gone the way he lived, quietly but with meaning. The town gathered for his memorial. No grand speeches, no marble statues, just people. Hundreds came, craftsmen, laborers, students, children. Each carried something Samuel had made or inspired: a bench, a frame, a carving, a memory. Moses stepped forward with a simple box, handcrafted by Samuel's own hands, containing tools worn smooth by decades of use. "This man," Moses said, "built more than homes. He built hope. He taught us that what we shape with love becomes unbreakable." The crowd bowed their heads. A boy placed a tiny hammer beside the grave. A woman whispered, "Thank you." The marker read, Samuel Wilson, Ichenbabait Isher Ichenbabait Basher San. He built freedom, one nail at a time. Though his hands are gone, the things they built remain. But how do we carry forward a legacy built in silence? Samuel's hammer may rest, but our hands are not idle. Share this story. Honor the silent builders in your life, and don't miss the closing chapter, where legacy finds its voice. What outlives a man is not his name, but what he leaves in the hands of others. Years passed. The workshop Samuel built still stood, though time had weathered its walls. Inside, the scent of pine and old varnish lingered like memory. Moses kept the space alive, but he was no longer alone. His son, Elijah, ran the front now, teaching a new generation the art of joining wood and purpose. People still told stories about Samuel. He once carved a whole cradle for a family who had lost everything. He taught me to build without fear, I never knew my father. But Mr. Wilson showed me how to stand like one. In the corner of the shop stood a shelf. Upon it sat a wooden carving of a man, a woman, and 2 children. Time had faded its color, but not its meaning. Each apprentice who joined the shop touched it on their first day. A quiet ritual, a reminder of where the path began. Elijah once asked Moses, "Was grandfather famous?" Moses smiled. Not in the way people think, but his work, his legacy, reaches further than fame ever could. No, in schools across Ontario, Samuel Wilson's name appears in footnotes of local history. In church halls, benches he built still creak beneath the weight of worship and joy. No, in homes from Toronto to Detroit, furniture crafted by his hands continues to stand, sturdy, honest, unshaken. No, but his true legacy isn't found in wood. It's found in stories passed from voice to voice, in the strength of those once told they had none, in the freedom of those who now build instead of break. It's found in the silence of a young boy, hammer in hand, ready to shape the world. Today, if you walk by the shop in St. Catherine's, you might hear tapping, metal on wood, rhythm and purpose. You might see a boy carving his name into his first project, or a woman smoothing a table leg with care. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it. A legacy not shouted, but whispered through generations. The story of a man who was once enslaved, who became a builder, a mentor, a symbol. A man who shaped not just wood, but history. Samuel Wilson, born Moses Jenkins, builder of homes, raiser of sons, keeper of freedom. If this story stirred something in you, share it. Not just online, but out loud. Teach it. Pass it on, because history isn't made in headlines alone. It's made in the quiet strength of men and women who choose to build when others tear down. Subscribe for more true stories of resilience, survival, and the unsung heroes of history. And remember, the hammer doesn't just shape wood, it shapes tomorrow.